So, Sydney Sweeney's latest outing as now a producer of Immaculate, which is this year's horror film to watch by some people's estimations, is not quite immaculate, but it's okay. What's the plot of Immaculate? It follows the story of Cecilia and soon to be Sister Cecilia, because Cecilia is following a godly way of life and she has decided to move to Rome from Massachusetts and join a convent where she will pursue a Catholic Christian life and get rid of all of her wants for earthly desires and pleasures. And she goes there and she joins this convent, and it's a bit creepy. The film starts off showing a nun, a young nun, fleeing from this creepy convent, and they're desperately trying to get out, and it's all misty and dark and shadowy and foggy, and it's you know, classically creepy, right? Not totally original, but it does a good job of making you feel a bit squeamish. Anyway, this girl runs out of the gate and she does the classic thing of fucking up the keys, right? She's hands are all a mess. She's washed her hands in Vaseline rather than soap. Oh, bugger me. Anyway, as she's leaving, she fumbles the keys and she can't get out the gate. And who are behind her but the nuns? And the nuns all walk really slowly. But she finally gets out and she squeezes out of this gate. And then she trips over. Oh, bollocks, the gravel. Every woman's nightmare in horror films. Bloody uneven surfaces. Anyway, she falls down and then the nuns grab her leg and they yank her with all of that 60-year-old Italian strength. And my cat's scratching at the door, which is like a bad omen. Fuck off! Sir, please! Sir, you must keep him happy. Right. So this nun... Where did I get to? And they pull her through the gate, and then they push her leg against the rail and it snaps, and it's this satisfying bone crunch, and she screams. And that kind of gives you a flavour for the film going forward, and that's when you meet Cecilia, right? So you know from the get-go something's going to go bad. And she goes to this convent, and just before getting there she's at the airport, and these Italian men are saying, what a waste, she's so beautiful, right? Classic Italians, always trying to get the girl, right? Ignore the cat meowing, he's just really, really a big Sydney Sweeney fan. This film is in the vein of something that I've read online called a giallo film, or giallo, which is basically kind of like a thriller, like horror slasher flick, right? And it borrows some of the ideas from there. It's kind of just a bit of a dressing, really, a bit of a genre dressing. There's no real kind of, you know, references to other kind of films. What I will say this is that Michael Mohan, the director, I'm really glad actually filmed this film with Italian actors. Now, I don't know if it's in Italy and everything, but, you know, this film is bilingual, and it feels much more authentic and realistic because of it, because characters speak Italian. And one of my biggest pleasures that I get, and also bugbears about TV shows and films, is when everyone speaks English or American, and they've all got like the correct accents. For example, great film, Anthropoid, with now Oscar winning Cillian Murphy. It's got Cillian Murphy, who's an Irish guy playing a Czech guy, so he's got a Czech accent, but then they're in like Prague, but then there's Germans, but the Germans don't speak German. It's just a mess. But in this film, they don't do that. The Sydney Sweeney is American, she sounds American, she doesn't know a lick of Italian, and that language barrier plays into film, and it kind of does that Hitchcockian thing of, you know, if the audience knows what's going on, but the main character doesn't know what's going on, you're essentially watching a lamb go to the slaughter. And that's what happens in this film, and it's quite good for the, like, you know, 2/3 of the film are building tension. Is it the most, like, original kind of Catholic horror story that I've ever seen, with really enigmatic and, you know, interesting, unique imagery? No. But the setting is suitably creepy. There's a few jump scares here and there, but there is, you know, some good takeaway sequences. For example, Cecilia goes and sits in a church and goes to repent her sins and confess her sins, and the father, the priest at the other side, is completely in profile and doesn't look at it. And as she's talking and saying more of her sins, he's getting slowly further and further and further away. And, you know, to kind of like symbolise that she's getting away from God, and it's like a bad omen and everything like that. and then there's a jump scare after that, and you're like, that's annoying, but after that it builds tension. And there's these nuns that are walking around the whole convent, and they've got these like red balaclavas on, and they've got daggers and things, and they torture some bad nuns, the naughty nuns. At that point, I'm quite into the film 2/3 of the way through. I'm there with it, but I'm waiting for it to really show its teeth, to bear its full claws, because the first part of the film with the nun getting a leg broken, who is then actually subsequently buried alive, is very effective. The credits roll onto screen and you hear her screaming in the background, and the credits are lit by this lighter that she had in her pocket, and it's really effective. But then the film shows its hand in the end and reveals what's actually going on at the convent, and then it just goes a bit downhill, really, in my opinion. It becomes clear that these aren't ritualistic killings, or it's not higher demonic power, right? Because at this point in the film could have gone in any direction. It could have been a cosmic horror, it could have been a religious horror, it could have been a spirit problem like The Exorcist, whatever. It doesn't. It's actually quite grounded after that, and I won't give the spoiler away because it's kind of the main crux of the film. Where you take that, it's like, I don't know, it's like eating steak and chips and going, oh, we've run out of steak. It's like, well, what you giving me is chips, right? So I'm not going to give you that spoiler. When it does reveal its hand, it goes into this kind of survival thriller genre, and Cecilia has to run away, and so she's limping away and she's fighting off, and it kind of goes into this kind of violent slasher thriller where she's fighting off this pursuer, and it gets increasingly more gory and torturous, and she runs away and she's in these catacombs and she gets out, and then the film ends. And that's really it. I know it's hard to kind of talk about it without spoiling it, but if I give away too much, there's no point seeing the film. Look, some horror fans might really like this film, and some of the reviews that I've read, I saw this film get 4-star from The Guardian, and I think it just went a bit fucking political, because what they were doing is, clearly who did that review was a big fan of Sydney Sweeney, because they followed her rise to stardom through Hollywood, through Euphoria. And if you don't know, Sydney Sweeney, Euphoria, there's a lot of sex scenes, there's a lot of nudity in it. And Sydney Sweeney is one of the actresses that gets nude in quite a lot of that series, right? Now, that was a big, what she says, Sydney Sweeney, says that this is a big no-no in Hollywood, and actually people weren't really talking about performance that much. They were talking about the fact that she got nude, which I always think's sad, and it's something I've noticed in films, is that whenever it's mainland European films, if there is nudity, then female actors will get nude, and it's not really oftentimes, I know this is a general sweeping statement, but it's not always focused on. If they're nude, it's because they would be nude in real life because they've had sex, and it always irks me or takes me out of it and you can always tell when it's British or American, is that there's two characters and they've just made love, sweet, sweet love, Marvin Gaye style, right, sexual healing, and then she wakes up and then she does this, or use the pillow, she wakes up after they've just had raw, hot, dogging sex, and she wakes up, brushes her hair back, and she pulls up the covers like that, and you're like, you've just been slapped around and you've got millions of his kids in your mouth or something, and you're now covering your chest. It just takes me out of it. In this film, she doesn't do that. There's a bit of nudity, but it's not kind of focused on, right? And I'm sure that her and the director talked about that, and that's great. And I'm glad for Sydney for that. And it's a shame that the fact that her rise to stardom is now coloured by the fact that she got nude, and there was a big whole debacle about it, people sharing her nude screenshots of her from Euphoria, tagging her brother, disgusting stuff like that. So, but this review, which gave it 4-star, was talking about that, and how actually the film's a commentary and a meta-narrative on the patriarchy and men and so on. And I'm just no, it's not. It's not. It's in there if you want to talk about it. Don't get me wrong, it is there. And that is kind of the message of the film, partly, and how that intertwines with Catholicism or Orthodox Christianity or faith in general. But it's weak. It's not so strong or explored enough that you can go, my God, this is a real deep nunsploitation slasher film that takes the genre trappings of the giallo kind of genre and then comments on it about Orthodox Catholicism and what that means for women in the modern day. It's just not that. It's just not that. And I think anyone that says it is reaching. Is it the great genre film that I just described and what that article, kind of that review made it out to be? No. Is it a complete piece of shit that you should just completely ignore, bury, never watch again and leave in a convent deep in the catacombs of Italy? No, it's not. It's somewhere in the middle. And depending on how much you love horror will depend on how much you get out of it. And maybe from this review that I've read, how much you love Sydney Sweeney as well. Because she does a really good job in it. And you empathise with her and you worry. And it is like watching a lamb go to slaughter. And the visuals are kind of interesting. And they do build up a mystique and interest. But when the film reveals its hand, it just isn't as fun anymore. So, is Immaculate? No. But it's decent. So, if you want to get a little bit spooky, then whack it on.